Will add value to the lives of everyday people. We will inspire, encourage, educate, and tell the stories of America's finest men and women in an effort to motivate you to live your life to its fullest potential. Be sure to follow us on social media and search Today with Tally. Be sure to subscribe, follow, and share the program as well. Ladies and gentlemen, your host of the evening, Mr. Brian Tally.
Welcome back to the Today with Tally podcast, where we add real life value to the lives of everyday people. We were on YouTube, Spotify, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, Twitter, Facebook, and About Face Radio. Simply search Today with Tally. And be sure to like, share, and subscribe to get every episode and stay up to date with the latest and greatest our guests in this show has to offer. Folks, today's show sponsor is the 10th Mountain Whiskey and Spirit Company. They are a staple in the Vail Valley of Colorado. And they are also the 2021 Craft Distillery of the Year. Now, the 10th Mountain Whiskey and Spirit Company is an extension of the mountain lifestyle, bringing together the old with the new. The unique tastes and flavors of 10th Mountain Whiskey and Spirit Company is what keeps bringing friends together, making new memories, and sharing those of the past while huddled around a Rocky Mountain campfire, telling stories and building camaraderie. Their brand can be found across the country to satisfy all of your whiskey and spirit needs. To learn more, visit 10thwhiskey.com. That's 10thwhiskey.com. Folks, please drink responsibly, and you must be 21 to visit the website and purchase any and all alcohol-related products. Now, we have a very special guest joining us on today's program, and let me set this up for you. We all know about the fight that I had in my weakest and most vulnerable time in need that ultimately led to me drafting my own legislation and hand delivering it to the Capitol of where our laws are made, to Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C., where I would hand deliver this bill and I would fight and I would advocate to change a law that was written in 1946, an outdated law that has destroyed the lives of veterans and their families for generations. Now, our next guest has a very similar story, except for when he was fighting the bureaucratic waters of the VA, he took it a step further and said, you know what? I'm going to become an attorney, and I'm going to be a voice for the veteran community. I'm going to be an authority in the veteran community, and I am going to advocate for those who don't have a voice or feel as if they don't have a voice by fighting and helping those veterans navigate the bureaucratic waters of the VA. Now, folks, I am honored to be joined by attorney Benjamin Krause. How are you, sir?
Hey there, doing well, thanks.
Man, I'm so excited to have you today. We have so many veterans out there that are literally feeling hopeless and helpless, and they don't have a champion, if you will, in the veteran community. And that's where you have come in, and you have really developed a unique business and a strategy to really help the veteran community navigate the treacherous waters of the VA.
Yeah, thanks. I guess from my background, you mentioned yours and how I got to this point, just getting into like navigating the waters. I came from a family where my parents didn't have college degrees and grew up in the Northwoods sticks of Wisconsin, right? Where going to college wasn't really much of a focus for us. And going through the process myself and how I ended up getting into this was getting my teeth kicked in repeatedly by the system, going to help from people. I couldn't hire an attorney if I wanted to, because at that point in time, attorneys weren't allowed to represent veterans in a normal way. So through the school of hard knocks, I had to kind of figure it out on my own. Started blogging about it, created a Facebook group that dealt with the program I used quite a bit was called, at the time, Vocational Rehabilitation and Employment. Now it's called Veteran Readiness and Employment. But there wasn't a lot of information on this. And you would turn back to the traditional legacy veteran service organizations, and they weren't there to really educate you about your claim. They were there in many ways to kind of facilitate the process, but not giving us as veterans on the ground the information that we needed to better understand our own cases, to better understand our rights, and to understand the system and how to fight back when you're getting wrongly denied or denied, denied fair process, much less due process. And that's how it all really got kicked off for me. So very similar to you in the sense that you had to figure out how to get the ball rolling for yourself, and then went to go fight for others once you figured out the wrong that was done. And for me, it included, after exposing a couple scandals with CBS Evening, or at least one with CBS Evening News with Katie Couric, resulted in VA approving to send me to law school. So because of the advocacy work, Voc Rehab decided in their infinite wisdom to send me to law school so I could help veterans better sue the VA down the road.
What was law school like going down that, that road?
So from my perspective as a non-traditional student and as a veteran, I would say that law school, there's a certain type of person that tends to get into law school, right? So everyone's pretty excited when you first get there because the personality types are real similar in many ways. But it was, I would call it lonely. It was hard and lonely. You're a veteran, you got a different experience in life. You're quite a bit older. I think at that time I was probably a good decade older than most of my peers. And it was a lot of hard work and a lot of long hours. So it certainly wasn't terribly exciting, but a lot of work. It was hard.
Now, Benjamin, you becoming an attorney, was that ever something that was ever thought about when you were a kid, or perhaps when you were serving in the Air Force?
So my mom used to call me lawyer mouth, and it was not a compliment at all. And so she, as a kid, I would always push back on whatever she wanted me to do. And in the military, that wasn't it wasn't a characteristic trait that our command thought too highly of. So I served one tour with an extension for an assignment to England, and that was about it. So I wouldn't say that the military was a great fit for somebody or anybody that is a natural born dissenter, but it suited me well and suits me well now, because I definitely don't take VA's first or even second answer as the gospel truth anymore.
Well, look, you have become a successful attorney, debater, an advocate, a strong voice in the veteran community, and also a very widely known voice in the veteran community that a lot of veterans look to for guidance and support and encouragement to really never give up and always stay in the fight. Now, would you mind sharing with us some of the top issues right now that veterans are facing in the country?
So veterans are still, so one of the scandals I exposed back in the day dealt with the Department of Veterans Affairs using unqualified doctors and nurses to diagnose traumatic brain injury when veterans were seeking that benefit. And I had exposed at that point in time the agency's failure to follow its own protocol, and started working with a member in the broadcast news media who had AJ Legault here locally, who would help get the story out. And so had done a lot of research and even helped some veterans with respect to their own benefits regarding TBI. And we had determined that the agency's own training protocols weren't being followed. And AJ took the story, developed it, researched it, and it eventually became the subject of an OIG report, VA Office of Inspector General investigation, and ultimately a congressional hearing that came out of the Minnesota, veteran community. And so that was one of the biggest. That's still affecting veterans today, because as I can tell, it looks like instead of VA truly fixing that issue and using competent and qualified experts to address those benefits, they've instead hired government contractors. And it appears that the government contractors in many instances are also not relying on who I would call a competent, qualified person to address those complicated cases. So like traumatic brain injuries, everyone knows is very complicated. It involves the brain. That's complicated. And what I do see is a lot of nurse practitioners and other professionals, even physicians that aren't neurologists or psychiatrists, physiatrists, or neurosurgeons, really addressing this, or at least the residuals of it. And I don't think they should be. I don't think they have the competency or qualifications to do it. And so rather than resource and get the right people to do this and to help veterans get the benefits that they need, they outsourced the issue to government contractors, and now veterans are still really, in my opinion, not getting the proper diagnostics done of a claim for traumatic brain injury. That's one. Two is the horrible treatment of caregivers and how the agency has really turned its back, in my opinion, on the caregiver community. We just went to the Federal Advisory Committee in January, at the end of January, and the substance coming out of that committee, I think, is embarrassing. I would be embarrassed if I was on the committee. I'm sure there are some good people that are on it, but the recommendations just lacked substance, and the caregiver program, for those that aren't aware, this is being covered pretty extensively on the Richard Leonard show right now on Rumble, but he is bringing in caregivers to talk about their plight and their experience. Now, caregivers are taking care of veterans that are seriously injured, where many of them have 100% permanent total disability ratings, plus special monthly compensation, higher level aid and attendance, things like that, where they need a caregiver 24/7 around them, or they will do things like forget to turn the stove off, wander out of the house and get lost in the woods, lose a sense of place and self, really serious brain injuries in many of these instances. And the caregivers are just not getting the support they need from the bureaucracy. And instead, the bureaucracy has created what are called SEAT, appeal review teams. And it's spelled, I believe, CEAT, at each of these regional offices, or at each of the VA medical centers that are underneath each VISN. And they're just not giving these veterans a fair shot. The due process that they're supposed to be following is inadequate. And the decisions they're getting back from the seats don't, in my opinion, follow even the basics of due process as it relates to notice under 38 USC 5104, where they just don't tell you the underlying findings that resulted in the adverse decision, other than rudimentary conclusions. The reason that matters is, like, how do you appeal something if you don't understand why the denial actually occurred? If you don't understand the basic findings of these social worker hitmen that they should be classified as, that go out and henpeck adverse information without getting better context, and then go up, deny the veteran, then the veteran and the caregiver are out a significant amount of money, but the veteran still needs their caregiver in the home helping them all the time, regardless of what the seat says. So that's a really significant problem. We had some other issues where the head of the Elizabeth Dole Foundation didn't even show up to the advisory committee hearing. Rumor has it he was over in Windsor in British Columbia at a pride event, skating or skiing around with friends and cronies, and skipped the advisory committee hearing. So I just don't understand why these individuals that are even there giving recommendations to the secretary are out on ski trips and not helping these veterans out. They need a lot of help. And instead they're out skiing in Canada. Like, you're in Canada, go to DC, do your job, buddy. I just don't get it. But Steve Schwab, who runs EDF, very disappointed that he wasn't there. We were there. A lot of caregivers were there to voice their concerns to the individuals that are leading that committee, and to have, the head of the committee left after half a day, and had some other, medical appointments scheduled for her in New York that I'm sure could have been rescheduled. But for whatever reason, even the head of the caregiver program wasn't even there. They had her scheduled, Dr. Richardson, Colleen Richardson, scheduled to go somewhere else. The VA did. So for whatever reason, they had this advisory committee meeting for the caregivers to support that program that is in desperate need of help. And the leading decision makers didn't even have the wherewithal to be there, weren't able to be there, as was the case with Colleen Richardson. So That's another issue. It's a big issue because they're looking at rolling, as we learned during that committee hearing meeting. Secretary McDonough had indicated the Biden administration is looking heavily at how the caregiver program is rolling out because they want to roll that out to all of our parents. And they want them to be able to age out in place and potentially use a civilian version of the caregiver program. But I don't think that the administration really wants the true story of the caregivers to get out. So they're trying to muzzle them as frequently as possible through really evasive contracts and other methods that the nonprofit sector is using to prevent caregivers that are part of their respective organizations from speaking. So to be part of their clubs, so to speak, you had to sign these onerous contracts that give up your right to your personhood and your right to speak. And I've read some of these contracts. It's going to be a source of a conversation down the road where, I'm concerned that people are muzzling caregivers and muzzling veterans and taking their stories and trying to claim ownership of their stories and their experiences. So this is an issue that's come up. It's something I wasn't aware of until January. And now we're looking at that. So we're getting into First Amendment. Then we have Second Amendment issues where we're learning more and more every day about how the VA, in my opinion, is abusing its obligations under the fiduciary program and through the way that it processes fiduciary incompetence or lack of competence. It is pushing the names of these veterans who don't meet the technical criteria for being incompetent when it comes to gun ownership, and they're taking away their right to own guns. And, whether or not you agree or disagree that a certain person should or should not enjoy their Second Amendment rights, I think most of us could agree that that person is due an opportunity in court before a real judge, not before the Stalin-esque version or branch of the Department of Veterans Affairs that has become the fiduciary program. So in my opinion, the fiduciary program is a complete mess. It's been a mess for well over a decade. A lot of problems there. They go after veterans and their families in a way that they shouldn't. Now, it's not to mean that some veterans don't need protection because they are truly incompetent, but there are ways to address that without taking away somebody's Second Amendment rights first. Because in our country, regardless of what certain parties want to say, you are innocent before being proven guilty. They shouldn't be allowed to just lock you up like we're seeing with the January 6th veterans that are locked up right now without due process and having an opportunity to defend themselves. So that's another issue. We have a fair amount of veterans, including the Q shaman, which I didn't realize that he was a veteran up until recently, a Navy veteran who's been locked up. And now we're finding out that it sounds like the Department of Justice and other branches of the government, including Congress, withheld material evidence that should have been disclosed. So we have veterans that are locked up in criminal matters without being able to view the evidence. That's a scandal. That's something we're very concerned about. And now learning more about with the revelations from Tucker Carlson, and hopefully the speaker, Kevin McCarthy, will disclose the remaining tapes that have not yet been published. So again, as veterans, we're concerned about that happening anyway. We're definitely concerned if that's happening to veterans. So you got kind of a double-edged issue there. So that's one of the other issues. We're dealing with problems in vocational or veteran readiness and employment, where the agency isn't able to hire enough qualified rehabilitation counselors to facilitate the need. And so a lot of these cases are not being properly adjudicated. The agency is knowingly withholding evidence from the claims file, but asserting that their people can still make decisions based on this undisclosed evidence that is not in what's called VBMS, so the Virtual Benefits Management System, that is otherwise known as a claims file. So for some that don't know, the VA supposedly went completely paperless a few years ago. They turned what used to be the paper claims file, which was the file that the VA used to adjudicate benefits issues, that anything in that file was the only thing that really should be relied on. And then it's given to the veteran to review, or the VSO to review, or the attorney to review. And in that instance, when it comes to veteran readiness and employment right now, they don't believe that the veteran's attorney, being me, should have the right to review that information without having to engage in extra legal argument and litigation in Freedom of Information Act requests or Privacy Act requests, which is outside of the scope of VA, but they're claiming somehow that satisfies their obligations to disclose the entire administrative file. So there's that issue. So again, Department of Veterans Affairs withholding evidence. They also appear to be withholding evidence in caregiver matters where the caregiver data record system, which is ironically named CARMA, CARMA, is not being disclosed either. So while the evidence there could be considered, I suppose, for part of an adjudication, it's also not part of the claims file. And yet it's part of the system, and VA should be disclosing it, but isn't. So we have a system that is playing fast and loose with the rules when it comes to records. They're not disclosing records when they should, and they're creating record systems that are not disclosed through the federal register and requirements of the Privacy Act that hold on veteran data. And so we're learning more and more how, in my opinion, the agency has been abusing its latitude as a federal administration through withholding records when it feels like it, and then disclosing those records or using them in adjudications when it shouldn't. So, the agency is, on the one hand, doing certain things that are great, it would appear, through the PACT Act. But then on the other hand, we're hearing about veterans who put in claims for the PACT Act or who are merely going through screenings to see if they were exposed to toxic exposure, who don't even know they're really filing claims, are then getting their benefits reduced. So one of the things disclosed during the advisory committee meeting was that 30% of the veterans are projected at having their benefits reduced through the PACT Act. Well, that wasn't disclosed. When you ask certain VA officials about that, they don't know what you're talking about, supposedly, but it's happening. It's at least happening enough that the secretary's team decided to disclose it during the advisory committee that we were at in January. So there's something going on. We don't have a full picture of what it is. We have the Congressional Budget Office that just decided that they are proposing cutting benefits for veterans completely if the household for the veteran earns over $120,000 a year, the household. Now, that's going to leave people out in the cold and have a lot of unintended consequences, especially for veterans who are forced to live at home with their parents because of the extent of their disabilities or other, issues that may come up. And at the end of the day, if you're a veteran and you served and you filed your claim and you got an outcome, you have a right to those benefits. That's your property. And to have the CBO right now at the request of, I believe, Congressman Bost, start putting out this type of information tells me a lot about what this sitting Congress may be looking at doing to veterans benefits. Because again, the CBO is going to be doing the research and investigations that are requested of it by the majority in Congress, as I understand it. And this is now immediately what we're seeing. So cutting benefits so that we can do what? Pay for the war in Ukraine? Like, what exactly are we doing with that money? And why now? Bailing out some banks that made a whole lot of bad decisions? I mean, is this what we're going to see? Cutting back on Social Security benefits, so we can afford this stuff. So the people that rely on these systems, Social Security and VA benefits and related, well, we're going to be seeing some cuts, I think. And there's going to be some shenanigans that Congress goes, I think, that happen to make this a reality. I think it's unfortunate, but we're already starting to see, the tremblings coming through the system pretty quickly. So that's my long answer. I apologize. I just probably 10 minutes.
No, I love it. And the funny thing is, you just shot off a ton of major problems that are going on within the VA. And I receive tons of messages every month. I'm talking right now, I have 300 messages on my cell phone because I have so many veterans that are reaching out to me. They Google VA or malpractice or whatever it may be, and then they see my story. They do some background information, and they go to my website. They send me messages, and the majority of the stuff I hear back from veterans are how their benefits aren't being processed in a timely manner, or getting denials, or they're going through just. I hear everything that's wrong with the VA, and that's hard for me to unpack a lot of the times because, I went through my own issues for years and years and years. I'm not going to lie. When I read some of this stuff, man, it does bring back some serious trauma, to the own, events that happened to me. But, what's special about you is that you fought for years, against this bureaucratic, swamp infested VA, and fed up with the system, you attended to turn a negative into a positive, and you said, you know what, I'm going to take matters in my own hands, and I am going to fight honorably, and that's going to lead me to law school. And once you got out of law school, you brought that fight directly to the Department of Veterans Affairs, which is going to lead me to my next question now. Why is the VA, and this is a question I ask myself every single day. I sit in a chair, anxiety riddled with depression as I'm losing everything due to no fault of my own. And I ask myself this question, and I'm gonna ask you that same question. Why does the VA work against the best interest of the veteran? It just doesn't make any sense to me.
I think the answer there can be answered in a question is, do we believe that what we see the agency doing with our own eyes is accidental or by design? So we have an agency that's been doing this and been known to be doing this, not really fulfilling what we think Congress created the VA to do for over 80 years, right? It's been 80 years since it was the Veteran Administration, and then it became Department of Veterans Affairs. So, or actually 90 years right now or something like that. So it's been this way for a while. And so if you were to peel back the layers, you would learn that the agency used to be called the Bureau of War Risk Insurance. And so I think it starts with that. So what exactly is war risk insurance, and why now is it Department of Veterans Affairs? And what happened between then and now? And I think that, in looking at this, I can only conclude that the Department of Veterans Affairs is really a workers' compensation insurance system that is very expensive, probably too expensive and elaborate. And it does two purposes. It adjudicates matters by having its own in-house healthcare teams, so they can track veterans, and then the data becomes very valuable to the private sector because it's probably one of the most robust electronic health systems in history, much less in the country. And that data becomes very valuable because you can track the care types, you can track the comorbidities, you can track the effect of the bombs that a company like Lockheed may have made on people that were harmed by those same bombs, that then Lockheed on the other side of the coin pays its contractors under QTC to then evaluate for disability benefits. So we start to look at the whole picture of these same organizations and where the money is, because really it comes back to following the money. But VA is a big insurance company. We know through some of the scandals that have come out in the past that involved Allstate that they used a system that came out in a class action lawsuit that was created by a company called McKinsey & Company, which is one of the most well-known contracting firms in the world, world class, created a delay, deny, defend model for Allstate as a contractor. And it came out, I think it was in 2007, came out. There's a book about it called From Good Hands to Boxing Gloves, I think is the name of the book. And I have done FOIAs about this and learned that the same contractor helped VA develop its disability compensation benefit system and calculators. So, McKinsey, and coupled with other contractors like Booz Allen Hamilton and whatnot, helped the VA create their current system. And they also helped, you just got to track the relationships. So they also helped Allstate in this one issue, or at least I believe it was McKinsey. Don't quote me on that, but I'm pretty sure that's how it went down according to the book. I looked at those PDFs. They did definitely say delay, deny, defend on it. That were released as part of the court proceedings against Allstate. And we look at the VA system, and all the veterans know about delay, deny, hope that I die. Well, that's interesting. Very interesting similarity in some of these terms that we see floating around. Very similar companies or same companies in some instances developing, business insurance adjudication models that the VA is employing in their, disability benefits calculators. So you start to see some of the same relationships. You see like General Peak, who was running the VA for a little bit, then went out, and I believe he started running QTC. And then you see Principi, who was head of the VA under Clinton, who then got out, founded QTC, then came back into the VA, and then got out again. And I believe he may still be on the board of Lockheed Martin. I can't remember for sure whether it was Leidos or Lockheed Martin. But anyway, a lot of these companies have a lot of the same players that are involved, and usually generals or other folks that kind of come and go between the Pentagon and the VA. And I think the VA is nothing more than a workers' compensation system developed to support the DoD to keep the cost of war as low as possible, while also giving the appearance that we take care of our veterans because we value them. And so they have this enormous PR arm that American taxpayers pay, tremendous amount of money, hundreds of millions of dollars every year, probably, to support this perception that the VA is taking care of veterans, when it is doing that for the ones that are we see front and center, most certainly. And there are some veterans that are very happy, but there are others that definitely fall through the cracks. And when you start to look at what has gone on, it certainly looks like it's insurance. These are insurance games, moving the P underneath the nut and spinning it around on tables to see where the magic coin is, or the P, or whatever game you want to play. And so I think that's what it is. The VA is an insurance company. It's designed to do exactly what it's doing. The designs emanated from Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who, as I understand it, hired, again, insurance contractors and other folks to come in and help them sculpt the regulations in the 30s so that more money would go towards his New Deal plan and not towards veterans. Well, that's what it was created to do. And then we have the Board of Veterans Appeals that came out in the 30s, where suddenly veterans no longer had the right to go to court. Right? Suddenly you just can't go to court anymore. Oh, we got this Board of Veterans Appeals because it's such a specialized thing. And you have no right to any other judicial anything. So if you lose at the board, that's it. And there you go. Then suddenly Disabled American Veterans is pretty happy because they get support after the Bonus Army March issue that happened in the 30s. And now suddenly you can't, as a veteran, hire an attorney anymore on your claims. You can only use a non-attorney VSO. And so you start to look at what happened. It's like, oh, well, suddenly by being a veteran, I lost my right to hire an attorney whenever I want. And that's what affected me. And I became an attorney. As an attorney, I can't hire another attorney to represent me on the initial stage of a claim, even though I'm an attorney, because of the paternalistic system that we have in place that violates my right, I think, as an American. It violates my right to contract with whomever I choose, because now I don't have that choice. I have to use a non-attorney VSO because they worked out this monopoly. To then, what does that do? Well, it grows it grows their membership, because members then have this direct path and easy advertising, because now suddenly you can't hire an attorney anymore. You can only go to a VSO for your claim. And the VSOs then go back and forth. It's kind of like the lobbying issue we see right now between the FDA and pharma, where you have lobbyists move back and forth between being a bureaucrat and then working at the FDA and then working for pharmaceuticals, and then back and forth, the revolving door of lobbyists. We see that within the VA too, where you have the back and forth between the VSO community and Department of Veterans Affairs and leadership, and also in leadership within individual regional offices. So we see a lot of the same, again, this goes back to the pattern. You see a lot of the same patterns that we complain about in the civilian sector. Look no farther than the VA and you'll see the same issues. And you see the same rot that has affected veterans for over 80 years, thanks to the New Deal and what happened there.
That is incredible insight, Benjamin. And you know what? I never looked at the VA at exactly what you just explained, and it makes absolute sense. Anytime you deal with an insurance company, it's always a massive headache. It is a absolute runaround, whether it's medical or it's auto or trying to fix your car because somebody rear-ended it. It's always just a nightmare. And now understanding exactly what the VA could be is this insurance company.
Mm.
And that makes sense. That makes total sense to me. And I never looked at it that way. And I know a lot of veterans out there today, they're going to be listening to this program, are going to say, no kidding. Now the dots can be connected.
Right.
And speaking of dots being connected, I'm a dot connector.
Right.
I'm not an artist, but I can connect dots, on those little games that you play. You go to the notebook and you 1 to 2, 2 to 3, and I'm good at that. Okay. And then when it's done, I can see this beautiful picture that I just made by just connecting dots. And that's how I've gotten through a lot of the stuff that I've seen through the bureaucratic waters of the VA. Now, I want to talk about veteran suicide because it's at an all-time high. And as I'm playing this game of connecting dots here, I'm beginning to see that a lot of these veteran suicides can be tied to the VA, whether it's the runaround, it's the constant denials, it's the deflection, it's canceled appointments, it's long wait times. Would you agree that perhaps we're seeing some veteran suicide happening that is not really a result of combat, but a result of the incompetence of the very institution that has been sworn to protect them?
Yes. Well, so here's kind of my thought on this. So you have a veteran with a lot of disabilities. They try to go get help, including healthcare from the VA, on account of those disabilities. I would argue that, in fact, it is their disabilities that did lead secondarily to their suicide, and that the agency, as part of its, quote, administrative evil, if you look that up, it's a term that is being researched and has been researched. So administrative evil. So the idea is that, and I'm going to butcher it a little bit here, but I'm totally paraphrasing. It's some research that I believe started in the late 90s, early 2000s about administrations. And when the administration, like the individual itself, is not evil, they don't mean to be evil, but when you take the administrative system put together, it results in very serious evil, where you have claims that pop out where there's false statements or incorrect statements, or you have, healthcare being denied because a bean counter up in finance decided that they're not going to have enough staff support over the weekend. And so, boom, now you're going to have, understaffed facilities because a bean counter did something. And, now there's all hell to break loose, with veterans getting sick or dying during COVID, as an example. You have, the adjudication issue and disability compensation. You have healthcare access. You have VRND, veteran readiness and employment, where veterans go in thinking they're going to get help from a counselor, a rehabilitation counselor. But what they don't realize is that a rehabilitation counselor is not your friend. They're there to in a forensic capacity, to take the information that you give them and to create records with it for a legal adjudication. They don't tell you that in so many words, at least, or at least they didn't, unless there's some new documents about it. So veterans go in there and they come out, they're like, man, this person says I don't have this and this and this. I need help. I'm broke. I'm not, my job isn't working out. I got fired, whatever the thing is. And the veteran readiness and employment counselor will just turn around and be like, no, blah, 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 right? And be very callous. And a big chunk of that has to do with the fact that they are trained in rehabilitation counseling. And again, behind every good door stands a system that was designed to benefit workers' compensation. And wouldn't you know that a lot of rehabilitation counselors go to work for insurance companies, especially those dealing with workers' compensation and related, And so again, behind every good door in Veterans Benefits Administration, you see an insurance adjudication system that was created probably even outside of the VA that was then applied to the VA and the veteran experience. Then you also have access to healthcare, where if you have certain conditions that are not service connected, you will not get access to, in some instances, types of healthcare that you need. I mean, it used to be very difficult to get access to traumatic brain injury services and non-VA services for that same thing if you didn't first have a compensation claim that was granted. And then it would change how your record was coded, and then magically some bean counter would be able to select, that you could get access to rehabilitation benefits of a certain type to help with your traumatic brain injury. But you don't get there unless compensation finds that you have a TBI. And guess what? Good luck getting that, because the Veterans Health Administration has assigned the wrong physician to your case. Oh, magic. And it just goes round and around and around. Oh, wouldn't you know? Interesting that, Dick over there in compensation picked a nurse practitioner to diagnose your TBI. And she says there's no, she looked at your record, sir, and there is no history of a diagnosis of TBI. Therefore, good day. Well, that's not exactly how it's supposed to go. If you have symptoms, you should see a competent doctor. There are 4 types. You have a physiatrist, a psychiatrist, a neurologist, and a physiatrist, I think, something like that. Anyway, so there's four types. It's written in their policies. But they were sending you to a nurse. And that nurse would give you what's called a MOCA, which is a Montreal Cognitive Assessment, RBANS, which is another type of assessment. There are many different types. These are screenings for dementia. So they're using a screening tool for dementia to decide if you have a TBI. But really, it's a dementia tool. They weren't really designed exactly for this purpose. And in many instances, we have veterans, and there are cases that are public, where we have veterans that have a confirmed traumatic brain injury with confirmed residuals of the traumatic brain injury, right? It's been diagnosed. And then an unqualified professional would then still give them a MOCA, screening tool for dementia. Well, and then decide, oh, well, you got better on the MOCA. Well, no, dummy, that's not what you're supposed to do. It should have been seen by a neuropsychologist, which is a competent person who could then give a neuropsychological assessment. Those are expensive, though, 3 to 5 hours plus, the time of a neuropsychologist to do it. And you got to pay Pearson's for the cost of each exam, and that's proprietary information. So it's expensive. So they give it to a nurse instead, and the nurse uses a MOCA that they can get offline, and nobody's the wiser. So imagine all these poor veterans. Then you got the other issue of imaging. So you have a veteran who's had a TBI. Maybe they've had it for, say, 6 years, 8 years, 10 years, 20 years, right? They go in, and the VA will maybe give them a CT scan. Well, CT scan is maybe decent for, seeing if you have current brain bleed or something like that that's emergent. But MRI is a better tool at that stage. 20 years down the road, your brain bleed is hopefully done, and because you're alive still. And they should be using an MRI to see what's going on. And there are types of MRIs that are more expensive than others. Like I think it's an fMRI or something like that the VA has the tools for this, but they don't use it for you. They use it for research. You, on the other hand, get this CAT scan down the road, and that's much cheaper and is going to give a negative false reading, right? Because it's not designed to do what it, is doing. And so they, on the other hand, then turn around. They tell the board, hey, we did everything we're supposed to do. See the policies as CT scan can be used. Well, you're not supposed to use it in that context, or you shouldn't, unless you're an idiot. But they do it anyway. And then the veterans, again, who are mostly, uncollege educated, I don't know how many of us actually go to college. I think it's maybe 20% to 30% of veterans, or maybe higher, but I don't think it is. And so for everyone else, which was me up until I went to college, you have no clue what they're supposed to do. You don't understand what the words mean. I didn't when I went through that process, and as I progressed through each leg of education, then I started to read more closely and realized that things weren't done right. But and that's what I see with most veterans. But up until 2007, you really couldn't hire an attorney, not at least in the way that you can today. And so these veterans, countless, hundreds of thousands, millions of veterans, went without real legal help at the time that they needed it. And instead, what happened is we developed a system that allowed our bureaucracy to develop a case against the veteran before they had a right to hire an attorney. So what system forces you into that? Imagine if all of our, accused criminals could not hire an attorney. Imagine if some illegal aliens couldn't hire an attorney when they needed it, because there are many instances where they should hire an attorney and need that help. Same with the criminal. But as a veteran, no, you don't get to hire an attorney. Why would a veteran, a person who used to be trusted with the most sensitive secrets our nation supposedly has, be trusted to make a good decision when hiring an attorney. Now, as a veteran, I can hire an attorney to handle a divorce, a business purchase, buying a house, any other kind of case I may have, except against the Department of Veterans Affairs. That's when I cannot hire an attorney whenever I want. Very curious, and instead we're stuck with non-attorneys. I mean, sometimes it works out. There are VSOs that are very competent and smart that do a great job. I don't doubt that. But one thing people don't realize is that a lot of the major VSOs have hired law firms now to handle their cases. And a lot of veterans don't know that. So they're still keeping the facade of, oh, well, you don't need an attorney for that. Meanwhile, the biggest VSOs have hired law firms. So tell me what's going on. I mean, let's be transparent with what's going on in our system. But they don't want that. The powers that be stand to make way more money through these contracts and these multiple. Imagine if the VA got everybody's claim right the first time. Imagine if a veteran with a complicated case was able to hire an attorney the first time, present all their evidence the right way, and then it's not confusing. The VA may have higher odds of making a better decision. Imagine if we eliminated all that waste and abuse from within the VA's own system, where they request all these multiple exams over and over and over again, just to, as we call it in the legal profession, to develop to deny. Imagine if all that just went away and the veteran got the right shake the first time, didn't have to deal with all this abuse or administrative evil that I was talking about, got a fair shot. Imagine if you got access to the healthcare you actually needed in a timely way. Imagine that. Imagine if after being injured, the VA actually informed you of your rights and told you that the doctor that harmed you was actually not a VA employee. Wow. Fantastic. Imagine if the VA was just transparent. I was fighting with the VA for the past 18 months to get access to an appendix of what's called the M28C, Veteran Readiness and Employment Manual. They didn't think for a while that veterans should have that. But we used to have it, and the current administration, in their effort of transparency, curiously decided veterans shouldn't have access to the appendix of a book. So they put the book online, taxpayers pay for it, and taxpayers pay for the people that wrote it. It's ours. But the VA decided, transparency, we're going to give you what we decide you need, which is what they told me. Oh, we've decided you only need this. Okay, well, I kept fighting. Eventually, I got it. I got it 3 weeks ago or 2 weeks ago, and it took me a while to go through it, 800 pages. But I got there. And there's a lot of information in there I can see that the VRE might be embarrassed about, that they don't want somebody like me to see. I got another FOIA earlier that I'd requested in 2000, I think it was 21. And it has all the experience notes of actual veteran readiness and employment counselors complaining about their job. Gosh, I can't think of why the VA would have held on to that for 2 years without coughing it up. Well, you got all the information in there about how these counselors don't know what they're doing. And they admit it. They're like, well, the veteran comes in for these telecounseling sessions and we can't get enough information. We don't know what we're doing. And we're frequently, it sounds like wrong because we don't have a better picture. Well, wait, but isn't a government contractor getting paid to develop your telecounseling system that now you're using? But you're telling me that the fidelity of that system isn't good, that you need more stuff. Oh, I can't imagine why the VA wouldn't want me to see that. Interesting.
You've said so many things. I'm just shaking my head here because I'm like, yep, been there, seen that, been there, seen that. And, there's one thing about me is that I'm very proud that I was at least able to go in there and get a bunch of bills that were introduced and ultimately have law that protects veterans after they suffer the fate of VA medical malpractice when it's committed by an independent contractor, but further leading veterans on and cherry picking those independent contractors to see their way out of these lawsuits, fraudulent and absolutely criminal. In my case, I was stripped of my right to due process. And like you said, if you are not a citizen of the United States of America, if you are a criminal, they give you all the attorneys you want, but being an honorable citizen, a contributor to the very country that you have sacrificed everything for to keep us free and prosperous is working against us. as second and third rate citizens, stripping our constitutional rights once we have got done serving our country and are leading our own private lives. Now, again, contributing to society, paying our taxes, raising our families, being community leaders. And I tell you, it is an absolute travesty, and it's so disheartening. And folks want to know why this all volunteer military is having problems with recruiting, and again, like you said, you start to peel back this onion and you start to connect these dots, and it is just frightening to see what is going on. And it is almost harder, in my eyes, it is harder to work against the best interest of veterans than it is to just do the right thing, because it's almost like a liar, right? It's like, oh, I got to keep up with my lies. I lie all the time. I got to keep up with all these lies until they catch you in the lie. And that's almost how the Office of General Counsel works, is like they always have to stay ahead of the game, and they always have to say, okay, well, I've got these guys all completely railroaded over here, but we need to make sure that we stay on that task, because if not, they're going to expose us like we have in the past, and it doesn't make for very good media publications when they are called out on a national level. But really, at the end of the day, they don't care. They're so powerful that they don't care. I mean, I've sat in the Office of General Counsel with former Secretary Wilkie and Byrne, and I actually sat across the desk from the very man of Office of General Counsel, Chief Counsel, that denied my right to due process and denied my claim after completely working against me in my best interest in withholding crucial information that would have otherwise dictated a different outcome of my medical malpractice claim. And, it's egregious, the stuff that I hear that is happening. And again, it's all wrapped up into this workman's comp claim. It's all wrapped up into this bureaucratic insurance company, and things have really began to start making sense to me. And now, even knowing that, it's even more scarier, like you say, the administrative evil, if you will. Now, we are running up on time here. We got about 8 minutes left, and this has been a very, very engaging and intriguing interview. I know I've learned a lot, but I want to leave our audience with some advice that you could give them, or some encouragement. Now, what would you recommend? What type of advice could you give to veterans who are listening to this podcast right now that are suffering, and they seem as if they are hopeless and helpless, and they can't get anywhere? What would you offer them? What can Benjamin Krause, the attorney, if you will, or friend, offer these veterans that are out there hurting today?
All right. So Benjamin Krause, the friend. Okay, we'll start there.
Well, no, look, at the end of the day, because I always say, look, when people reach out to me, the first thing I say, hey, is like, I'm not an attorney. I am not a 501c3, but I'll be your friend. I'll listen. I'll give you an ear, and I'll talk to you as if you are a first-rate citizen who deserves to be heard and who deserves 100%. To be listened to. So I'd like to use that term, friend, because you have a friend in me.
Yeah, well, and so I think that first of all, being heard, right? This is something that is acutely important for, I know, the MST community in particular, but also, everybody generally. But I know, man, the MST group, especially if they were victimized by another service member and they had the whistleblower experience where they got blasted, when trying to expose what happened and didn't get justice. I mean, that population is just it's so sad to see what's happened to them, and that again, the government hasn't really fully come full circle on it. But I think that First of all, breathe, right? So I'm upset, right? Breathe, get cool, right? Open your hands up, put your hands on something cool. Breathe, focus on breathing for like 10 seconds and cool off, right? If you're at the VA and somebody triggers you, because again, a lot of us have triggers, and whether it's developed because of combat, some other experience, or dealing with the VA, there's some triggers, going on. So if somebody at the VA is upsetting you, so I had something happen to me recently where I was speaking at that advisory committee hearing that I was telling you about. And I started to get anxious, and and I'm an attorney. I've been an attorney for almost 10 years, and speaking for a long time. But I suddenly lost my breath and I couldn't breathe. And there's some reasons why. I know that this is probably service connected, but nonetheless, I'm talking. I'm in front of former generals and other people, so I got to figure out what to do. So I just excused myself. I said, "Oh, give me a second. I'm having a hard time breathing." And I put my head down, shut my eyes, and I put my hands out and I breathed for about 10 seconds, and it was enough time for me to collect myself to be able to breathe again, because I was breathing. The oxygen wasn't going the way it needed to. So I was starting to hyperventilate. And a lot of us deal with, respiratory conditions, for whatever reason. And, a lot of veterans right now deal with burn pit stuff. And that'll happen where you're breathing, but the oxygen is not getting where it needs to go. So it's very important to disconnect, shut your eyes, breathe. If you need to walk away, just say, "Oh, excuse me, I'm feeling, I would say ill, or at least, I'm not feeling well. All of a sudden, I need to excuse myself for 20 minutes, or I need to call you back." You got to disconnect right away. Here's why this is important, right? Disconnect right away. When you're calling the Veteran Crisis Line, when you're calling the VA, these calls are now monitored and recorded. They're being used against veterans when veterans engage in inappropriate behavior, or sometimes get elevated, or sometimes they make a mistake and in their elevation and they see red and they pop off and they say stuff they shouldn't because they're dealing with PTSD or something like that. That can and will come back to bite you, and it could be used against you. So hang the phone up. Don't talk anymore. Shut up. Disengage, disconnect, calm down, and then regroup. I find that oftentimes writing out what you're trying to say first, it may take a while, but do it first. And then pretend like you're sending that to the most important person in your life. And so you want it to look good. You don't want it to have typos. Then you go through, retype it a few times, then read it out loud, try to remove typos, and then put that little letter away and don't send it to anybody, right? But just go through that process of synthesizing what you're feeling. That is huge. Don't pop off, though, to the VA, because there are recording devices in person. There are recording devices on the phone. We are being synthesized and listened to by AI that the VA has hired. And it's, in a way, I feel it's snooping on us and we don't know. But anyway, it's happening, and I'm seeing veterans go to jail because of what they say, and it's recorded, most certainly. So that's my feedback there. Find a calm friend to go chill you out. But again, the biggest thing is writing out your trauma is probably the most important thing, and you never have to show that to anyone. No one needs to know, between you and God. So
that is some very great advice, Benjamin Krause. You are one hell of a champion, and I'm honored to call you a friend and an asset, if you will, in the veteran community. I think you and I could do some tremendous work together inside a extremely vulnerable community, an at-risk community that deserves so much better. And folks, he nailed it. If you're in the VA and there's something wrong and there's a triggering event that can lead to a crisis, we've got to walk away, or else your chart will be red flagged and you will never receive that quality care that you deserve ever again, because they're going to look at you again as a troublemaker. And folks, we cannot have that. You deserve so much better. Sir, thank you so much for joining us today. We sincerely appreciate everything you have done and continue to do in the military and veteran community. Your service, your sacrifice, and dedication to our great nation is truly admirable.
Thank you. Appreciate your time. Thanks for having me on.
Yes, sir. Folks, remember to stay inspired, stay encouraged, stay motivated, and always stay in the fight. Until next time, for Today with Tally, this is Brian Tally. Good night, Semper